Apologies for that. And still, again, welcome for the to the Cabinet meeting the 8th of September 2021. Because the COVID restrictions are being lifted, we are all meeting in person, albeit we've got a number of absences this evening. So I'm going to move straight on to apologies for absence. I've received apologies from Councillor Hoolin, from Councillor Mays and the Chief Executive as well, who will be substituted this evening by Mr Clark. Any other apologies been received? Lucy? None? Okay, thank you. Moving on to item 2, which is the minutes of the meeting of the 7th of July 2021, pages 5 to 24. Has anyone got any comments in relation to the minutes, or are they agreed to be moved to be agreed? Agreed. Excellent. Thank you. Items of urgent business. I have not received any items of urgent business for this meeting. Moving on to item 4. Are there any declarations of interest in relation to any of the matters we will discuss and make decisions on this evening? I'm seeing none, so a mark as none. Moving on to excuse me, my statement. So was it a quick update on the situation in Thurrock in relation to COVID. Since our last Cabinet meeting, Thurrock and the rest of the country has hopefully taken a final step on the roadmap out of lockdown, and we're now enjoying many of the freedoms that we couldn't do for many, many months. Pupils are returning to school, or have returned to school. Students will be going back to college and university. Families and friends can meet indoors and in pubs, restaurants, and in their own homes, and all shops that are still open are open for business. These freedoms have been achieved through a combination of our determination, as we all made sacrifices to keep one another safe, and of course the miracle that is the vaccine rollout across the country. However, coronavirus is still with us, and there is still cause for caution. Thurrock, like everywhere in the UK, has seen an increase in the rate of infection, although nothing approaching the increases we faced last year, where we were the epicentre of the Alpha variant for quite a few weeks. These increases should really serve as some kind of a warning to people that we still need to be cautious. We still need to be looking after ourselves and each other, keep washing our hands more often, consider wearing face coverings unless you're exempt whilst indoors in certain shops, and respect other people's decisions if they do choose to continue to socially distance. And of course, the best way to really help combat this terrible virus is to make sure that everybody who's eligible gets both doses of the vaccine. Right now, it's available to anyone over 16, and you can arrange an appointment online or by telephone, or simply just do one of our walk-in centres and get the jab without an appointment. Remember, being double vaccinated does not mean that you're immune from the virus, but you are much less likely to be hospitalised as a result of catching the coronavirus if you're double vaccinated, so please do not delay. To give an idea of some of the stats, so far we've given, there's been administered 198,614 doses of the vaccine to residents in Thurrock. That's 106,551 first doses and 92,063 second doses. As of last Wednesday, the rate of infection in Thurrock was 248 per 100,000, with a national average of about 370,000. Which means that we are ranked 135 out of the 149 upper tier local authorities where one has got the highest rate of infection. So we are below the national average, and hopefully we will continue to be below the national average. A few weeks ago, we saw a new set of initiatives to tackle crime and antisocial behaviour here in Grays Town Centre. The initiative was introduced thanks to a total of £625,000 worth of funding that we've secured. 432,000 of that came from a joint bid we made along with Essex Police Fire and Crime Commissioner, which was bolstered by an additional 193,000 from the PFCC's bid system to help boost the security and safety around Grays Town Centre. Excuse me, this is obviously funding that's on top of the £1 million that we've already providing for town centre policing teams across the borough over the past year and the next coming couple of years. This money will be used to provide even better lighting in the streets, update and improve our CCTV equipment, create the shop-safe communication system for all of our shops to be able to contact the police should they need to, and indeed each other, and fund 2 further dedicated Grays Town community engagement officers to prevent antisocial behaviour and enforce the public space protection order that should be preventing street drinking, littering and spitting in the town centre. As we know, Grays is set for a significant amount of investment thanks to nearly £20 million from the government's Towns Fund and tens of millions of pounds being invested by other businesses in the town centre itself. All of this in combination will help make the Safer Streets funding work for those who use the town centre, make Grays safer and boost the town's nighttime economy. On a similar note with the enforcement successes, people would have seen that a couple of weeks ago we started to remove people's cars where they were involved in fly tipping across the borough. I attended on one of the mornings with our enforcement team where they were removing vehicles. I was actually shocked at one of the places the person drove further away to dump the rubbish than he would have done if he'd gone to our tip. And whilst that individual was very remorseful as to his actions, he paid up and made very clear that he wouldn't do it again, as indeed everybody else who's got caught and received quite heavy fines and indeed costs to remove the vehicle and get them back. Has made it a very expensive matter for them. We've got to remember that fly tipping isn't a victimless crime. We all pay as taxpayers to get it cleared up. If it's on public land, if it's on private land, the landowner has to pay, and this can be quite significant, especially for farmers who are, repeat victims of this environmental crime. We will continue to work to try and catch these people. Indeed, that one operation, I think 136 offences were disclosed for various people for fly tipping and other offences that was caught on our camera in operation. Shortly after this, we also see 6 motorbikes, 2 quad bikes and 2 cars that were being stored illegally in our garages, housing garages. And have now been disposed of, and those who were using them unlawfully are being fined. Again, this is a successful operation, all based on intelligence reports from our residents. So I really cannot stress enough, if it's problems with motorcycles, if it's problems with people using garages illegal, fly tipping or anything like that, residents really do need to contact either Essex Police on 101, or they can do it through the digital 101 service and do it online, or indeed with a live chat system that they have. Although it may not seem that they're going to take action there and then, it builds up a pattern of evidence, and then that makes it much easier for the police to prosecute at a later stage, especially for, as we know, the nuisance motorcycles that we are suffering from right across the borough. So I really do urge every resident, report it to the police. If it's a police matter, report it to us. If it's a fly tipping matter, and we will see what we can do and run operations we've done which have been very successful in the past. Finally, clean it, cut it, fill it. Since April, we've filled 1,992 potholes across the borough's roads. That's more than 99% of those in the agreed time frame. We've cleared 38 fly tips, removed 728 tonnes of waste from the streets and other public areas, and we've issued 1,581 fixed penalty notices for offences including littering, spitting, dropping cigarettes, etc. in the streets. So with that, I will move on to item 6, which is briefings on policy, budgets and other issues. Is there anyone that needs to bring anything forward on this one? Councillor Coxall?
Just to remind you, tonight is the last day for the consultation responses. Anyone is the cabinet members are interested with our consultation response. We have an agreement with Highways England, so our consultation response will go in after the date, but because of we need to full council's permission, as previously we've done on the they've then entered and let us as a special case because we do need permission from the full council. But remember, members of the public need to get in theirs in tonight.
Yes, it is very important. I shall be doing mine this evening, as I've been away for a few weeks. But if anyone hasn't done it, residents haven't done it, to get it in and get it in quick. Thank you. Sorry, Councillor Spillman, did you have your hand up?
Only about the briefing on this issue.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to item 7. Oh, sorry, Councillor Coxall.
Thank you.
I'll get it right in a minute. Councillor Spillman.
You've been on holiday too long, haven't you? You're enjoying yourself too much. Thank you very much, Leader. As you're aware, since the start of the municipal year, the Council has embarked upon a fundamental restructuring of the way temporary accommodation is being delivered. The strategy behind this is simple: replace hugely expensive and often out of borough private nightly let temporary accommodation with in-borough council-owned and leased accommodation costing less than the income the council is able to generate in rent. Replacement of these units will be achieved with a combination of 3 approaches, all of which have passed through Housing Overview and Scrutiny Committee, Cabinet and Council without objection. Purchasing stock directly from the market using potential borrowing on repayment terms less than the LHA income each unit will generate. Further utilising the fire lease scheme on terms less than the LHA rate income each unit will generate, and repurposing a decommissioned sheltered accommodation complex already under council ownership. In 2020-21, Thurrock Council spent £1.2 million from the general fund in top-up payments to private sector landlords to house residents needing temporary accommodation. The current run rate on spend is circa £100,000 a month. These payments cover the shortfall between the maximum amount of local housing allowance claimable through housing benefit and the rent charged by the landlord. Such accommodation is almost always charged at a far higher rate than normal market rents. As a result of this combination of directly purchasing stock, additional use of the fire leasing scheme and repurposing a decommissioned housing scheme, the council will soon no longer be dependent on nightly let accommodation. By implementing this policy rapidly, the council is also set to make substantial savings to the general fund during this municipal year. Furthermore, by letting these properties at the LHA rate, the rental income, which is largely housing benefit, is greater than the borrowing, lease and maintenance costs combined. This excess could even allow the entire homeless service to become cost neutral by the end of 2022-23 if things go to plan, and will deliver in-year savings during this municipal year as well. Whilst the financial case for this is outstanding, I am of opinion that the social case for these reforms is even more compelling. Implementing this policy should, in time, effectively end out-of-borough temporary accommodation placements and ensure that all temporary accommodation is provided within borough, except in cases where safeguarding requires an out-of-borough placement. In cases where it is not safe for an applicant to remain in Thurrock, out-of-borough placements will of course be provided. Like most things, these changes cannot be implemented overnight. However, I have set the department a very ambitious target. Based on the data I provided and a best case scenario, I think we should be working to a date of the end of 2022 to get this done. There is of course risks to such an ambitious target, such as a significant spike in homelessness applications and not being able to purchase enough properties. For instance, there are considerable concerns among many housing policy professionals that we will see an unprecedented spike in the number of homeless applicants as a result of the pandemic and eventual end on the ban of evictions. Mitigating this risk, as well as the longer term savings and ending out-of-borough placements, is at the core of the policy. Despite the outline risks, I feel that it is my responsibility to set this firm and challenging target. We're not going to waste the huge efforts officers and former cabinet members have put in to transform Thurrock's housing department over the last 5 years. I hope that this presentation demonstrates the ambition this administration has for housing in Thurrock. Excellence is the level that both cabinet and housing staff are aiming for. Nothing less is good enough. Quality services delivered with value for money in a far more human way. In this case, temporary accommodation that will keep families together, save taxpayers many millions of pounds over future years. I would like to thank Cabinet for their support in this endeavour, especially Councillor Johnson, whose groundwork last year made this option possible. I would also like to thank officers for their efforts and fantastic work. However, one swallow does not make a summer. This is just the first of several big announcements. Housing development to come. I again strongly advise anyone with a keen interest in housing to watch this space. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Spillman. And And you're quite right. It's not just the cost. There is the human cost of people already in a desperate position of being homeless, and then having to move completely out of the area, change schools and everything else, potentially only to come back 3, 6, 12 months later. It's a phenomenal piece of work, so you've got to be congratulated on certainly making the start and setting that really good ambitious target to get it done quickly. So obviously we know that London boroughs are quite happy to rent in out of London areas. So perhaps once we've got this sorted out in Thurrock, perhaps we need to start jollying up our colleagues in London and other places, so they're not having to ship people out of their own boroughs and taking a much better option of keeping their families close to their families in their borough. So thank you. Moving on to item 7, petitions submitted by members of the public. Lucy, have we got any? No. Matters referred to Cabinet for consideration by overview and scrutiny. Are there any? I noticed we haven't any chairs here this evening, so I can assume that there's none there. And before I move on to the substantive items, just remind people we've got 2 reports that have got exempt papers in them. I've looked at them. I don't think we really need to refer to much, if anything, on the pink papers. If we do, if you can let me know, I'll then need to exclude the press and public, which obviously means to turn the video link off for those items, but I don't think we need to do that. So I shall move on to item 10, which can be found on pages 25 to 40, which is the financial update Q1. Councillor Hebb.
Thank you, Leader. This report is my usual rearview mirror look, as Councillor Johnson last used. Look at the Council's financial position, this time for the first quarter of the current municipal year. Members will recall, obviously, in February of this year that the Council approved a budget of circa 153 million, not accounting for central financing and treasury charges. At the time of this report, Thurrock Council projects being balanced for 2021-22, but there are, of course, in-year pressures which will need to be managed as members would expect. Before we talk about the future, let's just talk about or reflect on the current position. So Cabinet received a report on the medium-term financial strategy forecasts and proposed actions at a meeting of July the 7th, earlier on in the year. And that reported a pressure for the Council of nearly 3.7 million over the next 2 years. This report provides an update on the current position and shows that, assuming all budget proposals are adopted, that 1.8 million in 2022-23 and 0.134 million, so just over 100k, in 23-24. So from a position perspective, we've moved to an improvement of 1.75 million from the July report. That is driven largely, as I mentioned last night at Corporate Overview and Scrutiny, there has been a movement in the positive in terms of council tax and business rate collections against forecast. So that sounds positive from a purely fiscal perspective, and it can and should be interpreted that way. The Adult Health and Housing Department, along with HR, Public Realm, Resources, Strategy, Customer Service and Central Finance, have all saved circa 2.4 million against budget after month 3. That represents obviously in-year economic discipline, which must be recognised. The Children's Services Department, while showing an overall pressure of over 1 million, is not a department falling out of any economic discipline. There are significant pressures within core services relating to children's social care, and the increase in both the number and complexity of cases, which has significantly raised the average cost of support packages. Increased cases, increased complexity of need, larger sibling groups, and the additional need for supported accommodation have caused a gross overspend of 2.87 million as a result. This can be reduced with the use of one-off non-general fund balance reserves, as we anticipated back at the budget round, with delayed referrals into the system and offsetting reduced expenditure elsewhere in the service to 1.3 million. The internal fostering service is continuing recruitment campaigns to increase numbers with competitive rates and the new council tax exemptions for new and existing foster carers. The 0.6 million saving offsets the additional cost with external fostering of 0.7. The Directorate, as part of the placement panel meetings, also has an ongoing review, as Councillor Johnson is obviously overseeing, in terms of all high cost placements and a forecast annual cost of 0.1 million and above. Other notable issues across the council associated with delayed referrals into the adult social care system and the external placement spend that is required to provide the right and best quality of care. Income for some services were impacted clearly by social restrictions. Central government support for expected losses in the first quarter has absolutely been forthcoming, although that support does plan to conclude from June onward. There is a long way to go to the end of the year, but nonetheless a fiscally sound position which shows how much work has been done by so many and is to be recognised. I want to now confirm the timetable for the forthcoming service reviews, where overview and scrutiny, involvement and wider consultation, where necessary, will be valued. On the 5th, 7th and 12th of October, Planning, Transport, Regeneration, Cleaner, Greener, Safer and Children's Overview and Scrutiny respectively will discuss budget-related consultations. Corporate ONS will receive a budget update and a further assets paper. Ahead of budget and following the December government grant funding confirmation announcements, Cabinet will hear draft budget post-government grant announcements, which of course is ahead of February 22 budget meeting. Overview and scrutiny can play vital contributions to that work, and constructive contributions will be welcomed on proposals that come forward. Finally, I will close on how we are supporting the Afghan resettlement programme, and if that will cause any further financial pressure in the council for this year. A number of properties have been offered to assist the humanitarian effort. These properties haven't come from the council housing stock, they've come from within or the Thurrock community outside of the council, and that is appreciated beyond measure, and others are encouraged to come forward if they believe they can support this essential effort. The council is clearly ready to do its part. We're working with the government. Indeed, the council met with the Ministry of Local Government, I think it was last Friday, to help nurture that support. As of now, there are no costs associated with the resettlement, and any financial impacts that do translate to the authority, I will report back on in future reports. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Councillor Hebb. Any questions from Cabinet? None? Okay. It's always that rear view mirror look. So I won't say skews, but it's great to see what happened 6 months ago, or 3 months ago, sorry. But it's good to see that it's on track for yet another year of balanced budget. The pressures obviously duly noted, especially those in relation to children's social care, and one of those problems that have arisen from the pandemic, which perhaps would be nice if central government will perhaps help support local authorities a little bit more on that, although of course central government has helped out local authorities significantly during the pandemic, and we know that support is slowly being cut back, but as you said, council tax collection up, business rate collection up, which does help. So it shows that we are on the mend as a nation and indeed as a borough. So with that, we've got one recommendation on page 26, Cabinet comment on the forecast outturn position of 2021-22 and the revised MTFS. Is that agreed? Excellent. We then move on to the next item, which can be found at page 41, and that's the communication strategy 2021 to 2024. And I will pass over to Councillor Duffin.
Thank you very much. So here we've got the communication strategy for the council, setting out the plan from 2021 through to 2024, so a 3-year. The council's comms team is going in the right direction. The direction we're looking to go, we're seeing improvements in the time. We still have a long way to go. There's lots of amazing stuff going on within Thurrock that we want to promote and shout and scream about. But one thing we want to do with this report is it's a partnership with us and other bodies outside, and really make sure we're working with those people before putting a policy forward to set the framework for the next 3 years. So we're going to ask officers to go away and engage with local media and national media, any media that engages with Thurrock on a regular basis, and speak to them about what we're putting forward here, because we want an idea that we all work together moving forward. It's not just one body, And so we look to bring this back ideally in a month's time. So it's not a long drawn out process, but we want to engage with local media, especially get their feedback on this, and then have that before we move forward. So ideally in a month's time. If it takes two, then that's okay.
Thank you, Councillor Duffin. So a slight departure from the recommendation on page 42. Yeah?
Yeah.
Just obviously so we're clear, and for the hundreds of residents that I'm sure watching this as we speak. I understand this went to... Councillor Hebb.
I think you was literally about to say that this went to corporate overview and scrutiny, and whilst I wasn't involved with the agenda item, I was at the meeting last night. There was lots of positive stuff said, and I think, Jack, you've articulated already that there's a lot of really good aspirational stuff in here in terms of how we market it. Thurrock, not necessarily as a council, but as a borough, the identity of the place that we call home or work or play. There's some really great stuff there. There was some, quite out there conversations with how we tap into digital content and how we share that sort of stuff, but also when we issue messages that we try to make sure the messages land, because communication is all well and good saying something, but unless everyone sort of interprets it and takes it in and digests it, there's clearly some work to do there. But there was a lot of really positive recognition. I think the point that Councillor Duffin refers to was around some points articulated last night around engagement with the media. I look at the Fair Debt Summit. So we've engaged with a number of external agencies on multiple occasions, and before we come to corporate overview and scrutiny in November, we've been back to the Citizens Advice Bureau as an example to reflect on a few points that have come out, obviously following a once-in-a-century adult-centric health crisis. And sometimes it's worth just taking a quick pause before you put your foot on the gas and say, we're going to do this. Let's engage with some people that have the passion for the area, as we do. Have that final exercise or activity, just going over, see if there's any more valuable contributions we can do to build that. And let's move forward, because frankly, no one wants to go back. Let's just move forward, and hopefully everyone will operate in that spirit.
Thank you, Councillor Hebb. It was exactly what I was about to ask. So thank you for that update. Any other members got anything to say on this at all? I mean, it is vital that we do sell ourselves, and I think sometimes we don't sell those massive positives to the wider community across not just the country, but indeed internationally. And I think it's time that we did. I understand that Thames Estuary Growth Board had something like 4 or 5 times as many hits about the Freeport announcement than we did. And if you think the amount of work that officers and members put into that from Thurrock, you would have thought it would have been the other way around. But so there is proof there that just on that one aspect that the game needs to change. Obviously, because the recommendation isn't what the recommendation is at 1.1, I'm going to need to have some words. So to engage with, did you say partners or?
Media and partners. Yeah. Engage.
With media partners to finalise the communication strategy 2021 to 2024. So the new recommendation will read to engage with media partners to finalise the communication strategy 2021-24. Is there anything that needs to be added to that? Are you happy with that?
Is it just that then it comes back to Cabinet for approval?
And then to return to Cabinet.
I don't think in the recommendation it's worth putting a time frame on it, but hopefully within a month, at worst 2 months, but we won't put that in the recommendation.
No, we can end up not usefully engaging with media partners. So the new recommendation in full is to engage with media partners to finalise the communication strategy 2021-24, then for the report to return to Cabinet for approval. Is that agreed? Agreed? Excellent. So, Lucy, I've written that down for, so you can certainly have that page of my report. So we move on to item 12, which is the parking enforcement vehicle removal decision, and that's found at page 67 to 76. And Councillor Maney.
Thank you, Leader. The first thing I want to say in presenting this report is that it's not another cash grab on the motorist. It's not about going after people who have committed minor misdemeanours. This item seeks to broaden the parking team's enforcement power so as to allow the removal of vehicles in certain circumstances. The first is pretty clear cut. It's where a vehicle is parked in contravention of a restriction and is also causing an obstruction to the highway or presents a danger. I think we'll all agree we should be doing that. The second situation where we're looking for authority to remove vehicles in is in the case of persistent evaders. They're defined as people who have 3 or more unpaid or unchallenged penalty charge notices. The trouble with persistent evaders is they're not just people who flout the rules and don't pay. They're also people who more often than not don't register their vehicles with the DVLA, which means when they do commit an offence and we issue them with a penalty charge notice, the chances of us recovering that are next to none. By which time, once we've commenced the enforcement process, we've incurred costs, and the money we lose from people who don't pay their penalty charge notices or our car parking charges directly undermines the parking service. The parking team is financed or supported in no small part by the money that we get in. And you mentioned when you were speaking about fly tipping how it isn't a victimless crime. The same principle I think applies here. People who don't pay to use our car parks and don't pay their penalty charge notices when they incur them are directly affecting our ability to more effectively enforce safety measures around our schools, keep our disabled bays free for people who need them, and to maintain our car parks at the standard people expect. I think it should also be noted that persistent evaders are people who, again, more often than not, are people who engage in other low-level crime. Nearly always their vehicles are untaxed, they're not MOT'd, and they're uninsured. They're often linked to other vehicle crime or low-level crime. So indirectly, by seeking to seize vehicles from these people, it will have, I think, I'm quite sure, an indirect impact on making Thurrock a safer place to live and work. Officers estimate, I don't know what it's based on, but they estimate that there are hundreds of persistent evaders in Thurrock. So these are people on our roads every day who are uninsured, untaxed, who park with impunity and have no intention of paying the charges that we levy. So if Cabinet are minded to adopt this, not only does it broaden our enforcement powers, it does also act as a deterrent and sends a clear message that we will go after people who think that they can act with impunity. 3.5 of the report summarises the situation in which we would look to prioritise the removal of vehicles. I don't think there's much more to say on this. It's quite straightforward what we're seeking to do and why we're seeking to do it, and I sincerely hope it sends a clear message that the Council are serious about apprehending those who think that they can flout the rules that we put in place. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Maney. Any questions? I've got one. Cabinet may remember 4 Octobers ago, we finished Cabinet or full Council, sorry, and off I shot because I was given an interview for a potential programme on the BBC about taking HGV vehicles off of the road for those that were persistent offenders. And I think we recovered a significant amount of money, not just for us, but for nationally as well, from some of these where they were coming over, parking wherever they liked, get a ticket, think, I don't have to pay it, my vehicle's not registered in the UK. And that works exceptionally well. I can't remember how much we got. It was in the tens of thousands of pounds. It sent the message out. Thurrock isn't a soft spot for this. So will this include those types of vehicles where they go over the 3 ticket limit?
It will, yeah. It will cover anyone who parks in contravention of a restriction and is someone who has, as I said, 3 or more PCNs outstanding. It will cover them, and they have a choice to make. We seize their vehicle, they either come forward and seek to recover their vehicle, at which point, they'll be liable for any outstanding PCNs and any other illegal activity for that matter. Or if they don't come forward, in some circumstances where the car's over a certain value, we'll sell it and we'll recover the cost that way. So it's a tough choice for people who engage in this kind of activity.
I think that's really good to hear because we've all knocked on doors in areas that are blighted by HGVs, which I'm not going to name one because if you name one, then someone will complain that we haven't named somewhere else. But it's pretty much endemic right across the borough. So and it is that. Well, what about those people from the EU that park their HGVs and so on? So being able to say yes, we did an operation, but now to be able to say that we can do this, as well as those people that park their cars, as you say, with impunity. And just can get away with it because they've not registered to the right spot. It's going to hit them where, quite frankly, it needs to either pay up or lose your vehicle. So I think this is very good news. So thank you for the report. So, Councillor Johnson.
Sorry, Lily, just something comes to mind with that. With if we've got cars parking of residents who actually live in the borough, which I'm sure a lot of them are. Is there any way the enforcement can be linked to look at other debts they have with the borough, i.e. if they owe council tax and things like that? Wondered if can you go take away and have a look to see if the enforcement side could look at all of it?
I think that's a pertinent point. As I said, the people who engage in this activity are usually, not always, but it's more often the case than not that they are engaged in a range of low-level, or sometimes high-level criminal activity. So I think you're right. When these people are identified, it is only right we look at their behaviour generally to see whether they are, there are other outstanding issues they should be held to account over. So that's a question I'll ask. It's a valid question, and I'd hope that when we do identify these people, we can, as I say, look to see whether they're responsible for other actions that we can hold them to task over.
Thank you. And obviously, as everyone knows, both Councillor Johnson and I collected, and Councillor Johnson still does collect council tax and other debts for local authorities. And we kind of used to do that in reverse, collect for council tax and if there were fines outstanding for other places. So I think it probably is achievable. But it's a really good question and look forward to if you could update Cabinet with that as soon as you get it. Please, Councillor May. Okay, there's two recommendations, 1.1 on page 67 and 1.2 on page 68. I'm not going to read them to speed up the time that we're here because it's somewhat hot. So are Cabinet in agreement with those recommendations? Excellent, thank you. Moving on to the Q1 Corporate Performance Report and Corporate Performance Framework on page 77, as I rapidly find it. And again, Councillor Duffin, if you'd like to introduce your report, please.
Thank you very much, Leader. So this is a report obviously looking at all elements of the council and how we are performing over the April to June period. The headline is it's really positive to see 77% of KPIs are achieved. If we look back to the same period last year, that was 65.6%, so it's a significant improvement. Obviously, there is still 23% that we need to achieve, and we are keen to go after them because the goal should always be to get 100% in terms of these KPIs. Direction of travel is positive, over 50% saw improvement, 18% static, and there was a slight reduction in some, but overall the direction over the last year has been good and is getting better, so we can continue to strive towards 100% because that should be our goal to achieve all of our aims and targets. There's a whole range of all of those listed that were achieved, and then some work and the route to green. We're making more and more improvements, more transparency, because it's okay saying we missed the target. We need to detail how we go about getting that to green next time we're looking at this report. So they're all laid out. Just to touch on one that is one I've always touched on going back to my days on corporate ONS as the deputy chair. Apprenticeships, there's been an increase there with 30 extra candidates for an event webinar in July, and hoping to take more on because it's great to give young people, especially with apprenticeships, but obviously all ages are welcome, opportunities to get a job and then build their skill set. So there's work being done there, but lots of different targets. The key thing obviously is, hey, the direction of travel, positive, 77% achieved, and improvement in those that haven't. So, no, that's the report. Is there any particular questions, things people want to touch on?
Thank you for that, Councillor Duffin. Any other member? Because I've got one that's been incorrectly reported, but and that is page 85. Payment of fixed penalty notices. For some reason, suddenly swapped from me to Councillor Jeffries. It should be me. Obviously now I would hope to see in the next quarter report update Councillor Money's report, which will increase the amount of hopefully increase the amount of fixed penalty notices we are collecting. So I would hope to see that increase. Obviously we are we are coming out of that whole pandemic and the COVID period where people were unsure of their jobs and so on. So whilst we have been very compassionate with those who can't afford to pay, and we will obviously make long-term arrangements for those that are in dire need to pay, I would hope to start seeing this increase in the coming months rather than it being indicatable, but that's not going to change for the foreseeable future. As I say, we are compassionate. I've had residents, like my residents, say that they were quite happy with the phoning up the service and saying that they weren't in a position to discharge the debt there and then, but could do it over a period of time. And they were, the people on the help desk were exactly that helpful. Set it up over a couple of months, no problem. So if you have got a fixed penalty notice in Thurrock, and now if you don't want to lose your car, if it's related to your vehicle, then really is now the time to make contact with us to start getting that money in to clear that debt. Has anybody else got anything they wish to add in relation to their aspect, Councillor Jeffries?
Thank you, Leader. Councillor Duffin has already mentioned it, but I'd just like to add it as well. Disappointing about the apprenticeships. Both he and I have been on ONS and talked about apprenticeships before. I'm just really pleased that we've got this 30 candidates being interviewed and potentially apprenticeships being offered. It really is an important and useful way of people retraining, getting back into the workplace. It's not just about youngsters, it is about older people as well. So pleased to see that we've got a route to green.
Yeah, I understand this is the approach that Tilbury Port takes. A lot of their new intake for retraining and managers and so on are apprentices who end up staying with the Port Authority. They feel tired and invested in and feel that they need to give back. So it's a really good step forward. So yes, it does need to be congratulated. So any other member? No? If not, I'll move to recommendations 1.1, 1.2, 1.3 on page 78. Are we all in agreement of those? Very excellent. So just to remind, the next two items do have exempt papers. If we feel that we desperately need to start speaking about anything that are on the exempt items, then please indicate that so I can remove the press and public, as I say, to not be live and discuss that, and then we can come back to that particular aspect of the report when we get there. So it is it's item 14, page 95, send education and residential placement decision. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Leader. The provision of high-quality education and residential placements for children and young people with special educational needs is also obviously an integral part of our statutory duty as a local authority. The key to ensuring we are supporting our children and young people who have these needs to develop their full potential is to make sure we have the correct educational placements. A recent needs analysis has shown that we are expecting an increase over the next 5 years, especially in speech and communication needs for pupils with autism and the need for support with social, emotional and mental health, caused in part but not exclusively by the pandemic. This can be achieved by increasing specialist provision in Thurrock to meet specifically identified needs and the procurement of external education and residential placements with the aim of meeting these needs as closely to Thurrock as possible. The report outlines our procurement plan to ensure that we're putting children and young people at the heart of the decision-making process by ensuring we have not just the right number of places, but also the right places to meet the children and young person's needs either within Thurrock or, as I said, as close as possible. This procurement exercise for out-of-borough placements and increased local capacity will support in making the best use of resources. As we've already mentioned, these placements can be very costly, and is part of the overall SEND improvement plan, which I can say has been presented to the SEND Improvement Board, who do approve of this phased approach. So basically, gentlemen, any questions?
Cabinet, any questions on this? It is a procurement item, but again, one of those that is emotive, and obviously, you know, we can see how much money we are spending in relation to this. It's not a small amount, but is what's needed, and it's good to see that we'll be looking for that as close to Thurrock, if not in Thurrock. So that's good. In that case, if there's no questions in relation to this, there are a number of recommendations from 1.1 to 1.7, which can be found on pages 96 to 97. Unless anyone wants me to read them all out, I don't intend to. Are we fully agreed in relation to this? Agreed. Excellent. So I will move on to the final item, which is supported accommodation for 18 to 24-year-olds. Again, Councillor Johnson, just as I find my papers.
Thank you, Leader. Well, we've seen an increase in the number of care leavers, in part due to our geographical location, with the historic numbers of unaccompanied asylum seekers, but also strong evidence of a general increase in the numbers of children who are looked after in that 10 to 15-year-old bracket, which actually makes this piece of work a very proactive undertaking, whereby we hope to have a borough which enables everyone to achieve their aspirations. Our current accommodation offer for care leavers is met through our Housing Head Start housing team, who work very closely with our Children's Services Aftercare team, something recognised by the MJ, as I'm very pleased to be attending an award luncheon next week with our initiative being listed as a finalist. By developing the procurement approach and attempting to move away from spot purchasing where possible and using block purchasing where not possible, will enable us to engage with the market, improving our value for money, but while still reducing our risk of high-cost emergency placement. So this report sets out our proposals to improve our provision arrangements for those aged 18 to 24 with supported accommodation to transition to independent living. And whilst it focuses on care leavers, it also contributes to our wider homelessness prevention and rough sleeping strategy. The report points out the particular gaps in our current provision and the procurement process which is needed to bridge them. And I'm pleased to say that feedback from children and young people and direct discussions with care leavers have all been taken into consideration to help shape our priorities, which obviously fall within scope of our statutory obligations. Once again, happy to take any questions. Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Any questions in relation to this procurement? I'm seeing none. Again, emotive subject. It's good to see that we're actually... Oh, sorry, Councillor Spillman, we're up for award, so fingers crossed for that one, Barry. Councillor Spillman.
That's my award, isn't it, Barry? Just to say, I mean, we've had some really. I mean, I was pleased with the work that officers did on what I presented earlier, and again, this is a fantastic bit of work that's going forward. It's there's so much, you know, it flows into housing so deeply as well, and and we're seeing some really good stuff from this team, we're working really closely to make sure that we've got all provision covered, and a really integrated housing and children's services approach, which is, you know, historically not been, you know, for local authorities, not been their forte, to put it mildly. But I mean, that's where we're going, and I'm just really pleased with this report.
Thank you. I know when Councillor Howden had the portfolio, and indeed I had your portfolio, we started this conversation, and it's, you know, Head Start housing has grown. So this is obviously another step forward, which is brilliant. Councillor Johnson, you had to come back.
If you have to just come back, I would actually like to. I think there's many cabinet members in here who have obviously overseen different papers as they've come through. I know Councillor Jeffries had an awful lot to do with this one, and I thank him for that. But I really do want to emphasise that there is no silo work in here. We do work very closely with the housing team. I know that from being there. I saw how close it was, and I now see it from this side. And long may that continue, because I do think, as I said in here, this is a proactive piece of work. We have to be proactive now. We have to think on our feet going forward. And I do believe we are getting there. We've got a lot of work to do, but I do believe we're getting there.
Which is good to hear. Again, I know it's a procurement, and I know there's obviously lots of recommendations, but this is a vital service. So, again, I can't emphasise it enough. Being up for another award, fingers crossed that we're successful in this one. Is always good to hear. So I'm going to move the recommendations. Oh, sorry, Councillor Hebb.
Yeah, just a quick thought. I was at Corporate Overview Good last night. I think I mentioned to talk about the Fair Debt Summit outcomes specifically around education in people entering the labour market, like from post-education age. I think at some point we need to take stock and actually reconcile what we've done for that particular sort of catchment of people within our borough. Like you say, about your point around cross-pollination, which made me think about it. If you remember, finance and education work together really well on that. We've seen housing and finance working there. There's some real targeted, focused, really pure intentions in terms of what we can try and do to help make this group of people in our borough prosper. I think at some point we just need to sort of take check and reconcile that. So congratulations on the work for everyone involved. Superb.
Yeah, agreed. So I'm now going to move, just double check there's no other questions. So I'm now going to move to the recommendations on page 140 to 141, 1.1 to 1.7. Are they all agreed? Excellent. So with that, thank you all for your attendance this evening in this very hot council chamber. And I call the meeting to a close at 19:52. Thank you.